Alberto Rios is a Regents professor, is that correct? At Arizona State University, and the newly named director of the Piper Center there, which has a lot of wonderful programs that bring in, do you still do the Fulbright program?
We do everything.
Okay, yeah, and send students abroad and have support.
What a wonderful program it's been. I'm sure we'll be revisiting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure it's changed a lot since I've been there. So Tito is a poet and also a prose writer and the host of Books and Company. We did watch about 4 minutes. Well, maybe some people want to watch the whole interview with, specifically with your interview with Viet Thanh Nguyen.
Okay. Yes.
So just to see a little bit of your style, we've been talking about different interview methods, like whether written or in person, and so we're interested in some of your techniques and maybe even some of your experiences being interviewed too, things that have worked well from that perspective, as well as things maybe you wish interviewers wouldn't do. So I'm sure you've seen it from both sides.
Some thoughts.
Okay, good. So I'm going to let other people ask you questions, and the camera should move around so that you get to see the faces that are connected to the voices. So, so what questions do we have for?
Well, I'll ask a question. Hello. My question is, it's your style is very warm, and I was wondering if people are sometimes hard to thaw, and if they are, is that a problem? And how do you deal with that if so?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. It's going to be useful for you to know how a program like that works, though. I will have talked to this guest in the green room ahead of time. That's the thawing out.
Yeah.
And when you're in the green room, it's a chance to just cover the paperwork, make a few introductions. They often have come with somebody helping them, either a driver or sometimes an agent, sometimes their handler, whatever they're and sometimes Secret Service. No joke. So depending on they have different setups that they require. Eddie Izzard came on recently, by the way, and he came with his agent and his stylist. It was fantastic. We'll talk about that if we have time. But it's during that little time that I get to just say a few things. There's no magic to it. One of the things I get to sort of slyly do is when I interview somebody, I read every book cover to cover, no exception. And in that process, I make a lot of notes. Sometimes that's if it's a physical book, it's in the form of sticky notes, which I then come back and I retype all of them. And I used to take the sticky notes out after I had typed something up, but it turns out it's very impressive to the other person. You've read everything in their book. So there's an odd visual cue that right away lets them know that this is not a noontime news show where somebody pulls up their book and says, "So you've written a book." Right? Just kind of get started. They just expect your interviewee to just jump in. In doing so, I put this up and I have them in front of me, and I make sure to tell them I have a lot of notes, but no agenda. That's a very important thing to say. I say notes because I like taking notes. Writers never disappoint me. I get something from every single book I read. And that's one of the great epiphanies of interviewing writers specifically, is writers are writers for a reason. There's something there. Even if you don't like the book, there's something there. And that's reasonably exciting. When I read on Kindle, by the way, do any of you read on Kindle?
Yes.
Okay, good for you. However, if you're interviewing, I will tell you that the thing that is incredibly helpful about Kindle, and I've never in my life as a writer or as an interviewer worried about the platforms that are going to get me to the point at which I want to be. That is to say, sitting across that table, talking to that person. If it's a Kindle, if it's a book, if it's some narrative that comes to me otherwise, if it's gossip, if it's whatever it is, I trust it, Kindle included, scary as that sounds. Kindle, book, whatever, for these purposes, not for how I like to read, just for how I want to get to that interview. Kindle, I get to highlight my notes, and then Kindle sends them all to me, already pre-done, which I have to say, especially in an extreme book, a very technical book, a science book, or a medical book, is incredibly helpful because retyping all of that is real work. That said, that real work helps me remember what's in the book. It reinforces what I'm interested in. And so instead of just reading through it and making a mark, to actually go back and retype it, an old writer's trick, you're retyping and you're in conversation with yourself at that moment. I liked this moment. And when you come back to it, you remember why. And out of 300, 400, 500, 600 pages, I liked this. And that's what helps me get through an interview invariably. So how do I break the ice? I explain this to them, not in so many words. I just say, I read the book, I read it entirely. There is nowhere we can go that I'm going to be lost in. So however you want to approach this, good with me. And it's my job as an interviewer to get out of the way. It doesn't mean that the person on the other end has free reign, but I tell them, this is an old school show. This is about talking. And if you've got something to say, don't cut it short. We're not breaking for a commercial. Say what you need to say. And I think those small freedoms are incredibly helpful to the person on the other end and relaxes them. They don't have to tense about every single last thing, which sometimes if you're in an on-the-spot interview, you've got all of these things happening and you don't know where you are and this is your sixth city on a book tour and it's kind of miserable. So I try not to let that be the case. Does that make sense? Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you.
So they need to see that you know what you're doing before you open your mouth. They need to know that you actually are familiar with the work, and not just familiar with it, but you've actually read it cover to cover, and you have caught the typos they don't want to hear about. Don't ever.
I have a question. How do you know how much of your personality to put in the interview and how much to kind of step back? And has your sense of that changed over the course of your interviewing career?
Yeah, that's also an excellent question because I interview so many writers that I know, just circumstance. Flannery O'Connor had that great line, title of her book, but the idea, everything that rises must converge. If you are a writer long enough, you will have met all the other people who are writing at the level at which you're writing. And that means that when I interview people, I'm often interviewing somebody I know, and their impulse is to talk about me. That's how conversation works. So they want to say, oh, it's like that line you have in your book. And at that moment, I have to try as hard and as quickly as I can to change that. It's not about me. And I need to get out of the way. I will tell you something that is a subtle part of this process is when I first started doing this program, I wore a coat and tie. And the reason for that is I needed to look like the furniture. I needed to look like somebody who was not the writer. I needed to distinguish myself in that way. And that's a different visual way of taking yourself out, taking your personality out. I needed to look like I was going to get this all going and kind of being in charge, but that I was not the subject of it. Now I just wear a coat and shirt. We come to see that times change, and it looks a little weird now to actually go on with a coat and tie. But the coat is, a lot of writers come with coats, but they don't have like tailored coats. And so, and not that mine are, but. And for a while, early on in this show, this series, this has been on for 20 years. Early on, there was a host of this show who wore flamboyant clothes and jewelry. The moment the camera came on, you couldn't help it. That's all you were looking at. I mean, big stuff, big earrings, big jewelry, big whatever, and dwarfed very often the writer who maybe was in a t-shirt and hadn't combed their hair or whatever it is. And it was the wrong balance of how to just visually present this. So now when I am talking, I try to keep prompting somebody into their story. And I try not to say, it reminds me of a time when I did something. The moment I say I know something is hot for me. I need to figure out how to cool that down, and I need to try not to say I again. It's all about you. It's all about how that works. You can't always do it, and sometimes you're engaged with somebody who knows your work very well, and it becomes a little different. I think of somebody like Sherman Alexie or Peggy Shoemaker, people I've known for a long time, where we just sort of relaxed it a little bit, and that evolved into something that the show now does that was the outcome of personality. And it's that we do the show with the idea that we will also do 10 minutes or so after the show of internet-only content in which anything goes. And at that point, the person I'm interviewing knows we can talk about whatever connection we have in that more appropriate place, so that the show itself has what they like to call a sense of being evergreen. It can be run anywhere, anytime, for any audience. They don't have to know me, they have to know the writer. And trying to keep that relatively pure, this was the solution we came up with.
Thank you.
So Tito, I'm wondering how does preparing for an interview that you know is going to be recorded versus an interview where you're going to get to just sit down at a coffee shop or in your office? Are there different ways that you prepare for those different styles of interview?
No.
All right.
It's a kind of a Marxist answer. Nobody so important, nobody unimportant.
Mm-hmm.
It's full on all the time. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that can't be casual, but it needs to be informed and interested and engaged. And so I did an interview recently that was not recorded but should have been recorded. And sometimes it's for these reasons. It was with Isabel Allende. And those of you who are from the Phoenix area, this was sponsored by Changing Hands, but it was at the Orpheum Theater, which is a beautiful Art Deco downtown Phoenix theater. And there were 1,000 people in the audience. And why that wasn't recorded, I don't know, but the circumstances for it were the same. I had read the book. I knew her work generally. I've taught it. Kyle, you know that. Katie, you know that. I've taught her work and so on. So I was very familiar with it. That wasn't the issue. This was a little different in that it was a theater format, not a studio format. And Isabel Allende, if you've read any interviews with her, is very, I don't know what better word to say. She's very sexy and she's very use of the body. So she was flirting with me like crazy. We had a great rapport. It was a lot of fun, and I knew some people she knew, and her daughter was with her. We had a great thing, and she carried this out onto the stage. So you were asking earlier, how do you keep yourself out of something? In a case like that, putting yourself into it is the smarter way to take yourself out of it. You become the prop of the writer. I think she was having a lot of fun with it. I was too. And we knew that was just simply theater. It was a great way to have fun with the audience, to take the sharper edge of the discourse on the text itself, to deflect a little bit from that and have fun upstage visually, on stage, and be playful at the same time. So that ended up being kind of a curiously nice way, balanced way to approach something in which you do insert yourself, or you let yourself be inserted. Now there's a big distinction there. It's a subtle one, but she brought me into it, and we just let it be playful. I'm gonna confess something in a situation like that too. You can't hear very well. So whatever she was saying, I didn't hear it all. And oddly enough, that makes for a lot of unintentional humor, where you don't react fast enough or whatever, and everybody thinks that's just really funny. And I was just lucky to survive it. But I couldn't hear everything. And yet if you're familiar with doing interviews and you've done them enough, you pretty much know what the sensibility of the answer is. Incidentally, she gave one really shocking answer to something, and it's somebody who's now become a student of mine. And this is also about me personally, given my own particular background and ability to speak Spanish. Somebody from the audience in the question and answer period asked her in Spanish if she had any advice for somebody in this country writing in Spanish in terms of publication. And she said, this was shocking. This was all an exchange in Spanish that we only loosely translated outward. But she said, yes, my advice to you is to write in English. That was a very pragmatic, very difficult, very wise and hard, it was just a hard thing to say. It's hard for her to say, hard for the student to hear, hard for those in the audience who understood. It was a marketplace answer, not an answer that stayed true to the heart. And yet, and she went on to explain how she was just in the right place at the right time, and how her story is not everybody's story. And that publication in Latin America, where if you're writing in Spanish, is so minimal, it doesn't compare nearly to what happens in the United States. So her answer was quite striking. What was the question? I can't remember.
It was about meeting people on screen or off screen, right? Which is, some people in this class will be conducting interviews with people over email.
Yes.
Going forward too, if you've done that, or if you've had somebody.
Oh, I have done it, and I have some feelings about it. I'm going to start first with a very small anecdote from, I think, the 1980s. And there was a candidate running for office in Tucson. And it was kind of a small district kind of office. And I knew this guy, this politician. And he was running in a kind of a crowded field. And the newspaper, the newspaper reporter sent out a questionnaire to 6 candidates, whatever it was. And then they published all of the answers, including one that said, this person chose not to answer. Okay, which sounds very negative, right? Well, this person, in answering the questions, very studiously answered each thing. But then the last question was, is there anything you would like to add that I haven't asked? And he wrote down, and to their credit, they published it. He said, yes, every journalism student is a D student. What he meant by that is he did all the work. The interviewer, whose name this interview is going to go under in so many ways, and that's what's going to happen with you, you have to know that the person on the other end, if they're going to take this seriously, and they likely will, it's a lot of work. You're going to get all the credit. It's a curious balance. You think you're not going to get the credit, and you think that other person's name is going to take it, and so on like that. But the truth of it is, you're going to file it, you're going to track it, you're going to keep it. That other person's going to go on to many, many other interviews and so on. And all that work, especially if it's original work, some writers will give you canned answers, and I understand that. But if that writer has given you an original set of answers, it's so unclear in the realm of intellectual property rights. Who does that belong to? Who does that belong to? Especially if the question is basically, how do you write? And then 6 pages later, that author has written something, and then this gets published under your name, copyrighted under that journal or whatever it is. That is a very, very interesting issue. It has been for a long time without particularly perfect resolution. Different journals, different newspapers are enlightened in different ways, but you need to remember to figure out how to make sure the writer gets something in the bargain. And I don't know exactly what that is. Maybe a good introductory précis, a little essay or something that contextualizes it, that speaks to the writer, that does a little bit more, but that shows that you did work too. That's a fair bargain, and you need to think about that as you send questionnaires out. Those kind of interviews, they can be wonderful, absolutely wonderful, but there has to be something in the mix that makes everybody happy. Does that sound scary? You're about to all go out and do that, I know.
So I have another.
If I can just add to the tail end of that. The reason I bring that up is I know that when I do that kind of an interview, I invent for the moment. It's all new stuff. And it's just as if I had written a poem or a story. It happens to be in thought, reflective thought, but it's a poem or a story. And so that has value to me, just as something I would like to remember, something that was meaningful enough for me to feel I needed to say. And ultimately, that creates something special, and we should treat those kinds of interviews as exactly that. They are special.
So I was going to ask another question. So obviously with Books & Co., that gets edited, but the person knows that they're on camera and all of those things. But when it comes to maybe an email interview or a sit-down interview where you're recording someone, do you show the person you interviewed your final product before you send it out? Is that something that you consider good literary citizenship?
That's a good question. On Books & Co., they never get to see it.
Yeah.
And by the way, it does not get edited.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is when the camera comes on, we go to the end. And unless something truly dramatic happens, in one case, somebody's microphone fell off and hit the table, for example. That happened to be right near where we take a break and reintroduce the show. They were able to just cut that little segment out, and we ran a little longer on the far end, and that's it. But aside from that, we don't edit that. So it is interesting in that the person who's there experienced the moment. We're hiding nothing. We're not skewing it. We're not. So they can feel reasonably comfortable that whatever they said is exactly what's going to happen on the program, and there's no trick involved in that. In terms of the other thing, when you interview, do I appreciate, for example, getting an interview back? Boy, that's a great question, because there isn't anybody who gets interviewed who's happy with an interview. So the process could go on forever. And you have to, I think the wiser course is to assure the person you're interviewing that you will take good care of them, that you will be true to the exchange, that they can see it if they want, but that's not your normal policy, but you're not trying to hide anything from them either. But the better option is to really just go with it, because I know that I've got to let my voice go, away from, just like your poems do, just like your stories do. You write it and then you let it go. Nobody comes back and says, we're gonna edit that a little bit, or what do you think? There's no that kind of exchange. You need to think about it in terms of an interview too. Person wrote it. If they wrote it, those words, so long as you are true to them, if you're going to edit those words in some great fashion, I mean, most people don't write or or whatever you do in the voice range into their interview, so you don't really have those editorial issues. If you're truncating it for space or for something else, you should tell the person that we did a little bit of editing like that, but we did not change any of your words. That's the crucial part of that. And we feel we were true to you and took care of you. You don't really need to worry. But if you want to see it, I think that's a reasonable request from the person. You should do everything you can to dissuade them, though. It's fresher, it's stronger when there isn't a burnishing of it by the writer.
I have a question. Say, I don't know, we're going to be talking to authors who are very, what happens if they say, yes, I do want to see it, and then they have a problem with it? Then, are you obliged to change it for them?
Well, if you're asking me truly from the perspective of the writer, yeah, if I object to it that much, you did something, I think. I don't know. I don't know what you would. I don't know why that would be a provocation like that enough so that I would say I don't like what you did if they wrote it.
But perhaps you're more reasonable than the people we'll be interviewing. I don't know. I can see it being a problem.
That's the human dimension. You have to know that you have to know that it is a community, and people are different from each other. They're going to react differently. And if they don't want to do the interview, if they don't like it, you just say, all right, we're pulling it.
Okay.
Have some guts. It doesn't mean that they get to control what they, or rewrite it or whatever. It's not an act of rewriting. And you need to say that. We don't want you to rewrite this. We want you to check it for accuracy, but not for editorial revision. We just can't do it. We've already assigned this much space. We're rolling on it. So and you can find lots of language like that. If you look at any book contract or whatever, there's a when you're doing proofs and stuff like that, they come back and they say, at this stage, we're looking for anything like a spelling error or a name that we got wrong, but no, we're not looking for editorial rewrite here anymore. You've already had that option. So I think if you just find some language, you've got to decide what it is you want them not to do. Okay. Write that in ahead of time. Don't do this. But it's got to be fair. And if it's fair, I think people respond quite well. You may occasionally get somebody who is just in their nature. You got this wrong. You did this, or I don't like it. In which case you literally have to stand by what is meaningful to you. I did it right. And if we can't agree on that, then we need to just call it a day. And don't be scared of that. I know you will have put a lot of work into something like that. They will have too. Believe me, they don't want to see it pulled. But they can't make it into something it wasn't. Right? So you have to go with that. You don't have to be mean or weird or strange about it. I think it can be a friendly exchange and say, this we said this ahead of time. It's clear. This is our editorial policy, the journal I'm working for, or whoever I'm doing it for, and we very much want to include you. And we thought we had what you were happy with. I'm sorry you don't find it, whatever. And you can suggest to us what's upsetting to you, but we can only make minimal change. And here's the original script you sent us, or here's the original transcript of the thing you sent us. So this is where we're getting it. But I'm not sure what you would do to a piece to make somebody that upset either. So
I'm thinking of a friend who interviewed a classical music composer, and the classical music composer, this is back in Australia, and the composer swore a lot. just in the transcript. And then the transcript, the interview had swearing in it, and the composer insisted on them pulling it because there was swearing throughout. But the swearing was like 15% of the text.
Yeah.
And my friend felt they had to put it in because this, anyway.
You're hitting a like a number one issue. And Books and Company, for example, because it's a PBS and quote unquote family friendly show, the person ahead of time signs, they don't sign a waiver. They get a caution saying, if you can avoid these, all the magical F and S words, because we are a family friendly show, and because this will last for 20 years online, and because we want to do right by everybody, your audience included, please refrain from doing that. What we say is, now if you do slip in a word or something, we can edit that out, and we will, because we have an audience responsibility, and we have PBS and whoever guides television, the television people, whoever that is. There are government regulations. We just can't run it that way. You need to be clear on what your policy is, whoever you're interviewing for, or if it's just you personally. You need to speak about that up front. If you're going to, do you want that included? You know what I mean? You need to just be clear about it, and then understand that if they say yes, great. If they say no, great. That's just their way of getting the words out. You have to respect that they don't intend for that part of it to be how they want to be remembered or what the interview was. It was just their thought process that they're being a little intimate with you about, and trying to give you a real glimpse into something. But that's a relatively new phenomenon. People may have given interviews like that through the centuries, and we don't hear a word of it. So we want to put those words in because we are cutting edge 21st century enlightened beings, and we know that's how people speak. But on the other hand, that's not necessarily how interviews are rendered. And speaking is different from being pictured on the page. You kind of have to come to some agreement about that ahead of time. And ahead of time is the key.
So we've talked a lot about things that work for interviews. Is there anything in the history of your writing career that you think, man, I'm really glad I stopped doing that one thing? Or are there things that continue to happen to you when you're interviewed that you're like, I really wish people wouldn't do that?
If you mean big type thing, right? Like life career choice.
Yeah.
I went to law school, and I got a first BA in creative writing, and then I got a second degree in psychology. And then I won't go through the whole story, but I decided to go to law school, and I came from a family that had been in law and whatever, and I got into law school. And one of the hardest things about law school is getting in. That LSAT test, and it's a test that means well, but it's cruel. It helps you to understand if you're prepared to do the kind of work you're going to be doing when you get in. So I got into law school, and I got through the first year, and I was doing fine. And I came to one of the great crossroads in my life. I could do this, which is very different from, do I want to do this? Now, my parents were already proud of me. Their son, the lawyer. My friends were asking for advice. I'd already taken contract law, and oddly enough, things that were later going to serve me. I also knew that a future as an attorney was pretty good, relatively speaking. My fallback was what? I don't know, going back to being a poet? What kind of future is that? I called my parents, asked for advice, and they acted like parents. They said, son, you've never disappointed us. Whatever you decide. Thanks a lot for nothing. And so I have to say, I made one of the big decisions of my life. I decided to you know, we're all expecting me to say quit law school, which I did. And I have to say, I'll confess to you, I went into a depression that lasted probably 7 or maybe even 8 minutes. And the truth is, and this was a big personal truth for me. I didn't quit law school. I had quit writing. And it took everything that I could do to help me understand what I wanted to do, no matter what. And I went back to writing, got an MFA, started, just did that, and understood that was the more difficult road. That was Robert Frost's, the less traveled road at that point. But I knew it was the right one. And those moments don't come to you often in life. They're difficult when you're in the middle of them. It's all questions, no answers. You just have to decide. And I understood that law school was all about words as well. It wasn't foreign to me, but they weren't words being used in a fashion that I thought was good for me or appropriate to how I wanted words or language to be used. I had a different idea about it, and I wasn't, I would say, afraid of that. And so that's what I did. And that's what I stopped doing. You asked me what I stopped doing. That was it. Going in a direction that was working.
I have a really general question. What question have we not asked that we should have asked at this point? And I realize this is very limited, but I feel like you're obviously in a position where you're conducting a lot of interviews and you've been on the receiving end. So what haven't we asked that you feel like we really need to know as we go out into the world to potentially conduct our very first?
Yeah, I think a really important thing for you to know is there's absolutely no magic to this. But the magic is doing it well, doing it the best you can do it, and not anything less than that. If you come prepared, if you come because you are engaged and you want to be there, if you trust in writers or whoever you're interviewing, this is not always how it works. You may be interviewing, but this is not like firing line or a political show. I'm not there to arm wrestle with somebody over that thing. I'm there to talk the tender business. As writers, we know it's one of the hardest things to talk publicly about. Your book, your poems, your stories, your plays, your songs, they will speak for themselves, but the process, that's tender business. You're talking often about people you know, family, people you care about, animals that have died, whatever it is. These are intensely personal things. And to shepherd that in a room from somebody, to get them to share it, they have to trust you. They have to believe everything I just said, that you're there, you're prepared, you want to know, and that it matters, that these things matters, and that they're going to matter to other people. If it matters to you, it will matter to other people. There's nothing more seductive than that. Writers write because they want to write. They know there's something in it, and they can point to the polished thing, but they lived the unpolished process. That's what they lived. The book itself is not their life anymore. That's done. And I think you need to keep in mind that tender thing, that tender point. That's the question. That's the issue. We want to have a list of what questions should I ask and what answers should I be. There's no such thing as a creative respondent. You know that you have to think on your feet. Or if your feet think, maybe they think, I don't know. I don't know, where did we get that phrase, think on your feet? I'm sitting down when I think, so I don't know what the metaphor there would be, but you gotta you've got to be there to know that everything you read and all of the notes that you took and everything you thought beforehand isn't what you're going to do. You're going to invent in the moment. You're going to write the poem of this interview. You're going to write the story of this interview. And it's going to be new because of everything you've done, because you read the book, but not as a reframing of it. You're going to do something new. And somebody, when they are on that wavelength with you, they get it. They get it. There's a wonderful saying by the head of the Dadaist movement, Tristan Tzara, and it's one of my favorite all-time sayings. Kyle, you may be you're nodding your head, you probably remember this. He said, thought occurs in the mouth. Now, that is akin to something else. I worked with a potter for a while. We were doing different things around in public art. And he said one of his great frustrations is that he would go to a showing and he would get a potter's wheel and he'd put some clay on it and he would make the wheel go around and he'd bring up a pot and he'd cut it and somebody would say, great, how much do you want for that? And he'd say $500. And they would be aghast and they'd go, $500? It took you 2 minutes. He said, no, it took me 20 years. His whole life was in training for that moment. And when you as an interviewer, that's the same thing. You have done everything you can to prepare. I'm over dramatizing this, I know, but you've done everything you can do. Now you need to let go of that and make the act happen.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question. I was wondering if you encountered anything earlier on in your career that perhaps during an interview threw you off and how you adapted to that, or how you prepared yourself for further interviews to adapt to that kind of situation.
Yeah, people misquote you all the time. When you do live interviews, or not live interviews, when you do, if somebody comes with a microphone and they're coming to your house or something, they interview you, they go back and they write the thing and they don't show it to you and it goes out and you read it and you go, oh my God, that's the opposite of what I said. They totally missed the thing. And I have to say, they throw you kind of wildly in the moment you read it, but you learn pretty quickly that you've just got to let it go. You've just got to let it go. And when somebody says, did you really say that? You said, no, absolutely not. Here's what I said. And you correct it as you can, but the cat is out of that bag. And you have to just know that your chance to fix it will come in a next interview. Your chance to reframe that, to talk about it. You get to say later on, you know, I was recently misquoted in an interview and have that get published. So you have to know that there are solutions, but they are rarely immediate when it comes to the idea of what happens in an interview. Now, you have to hope those things don't happen, but you also have to know, those of you who are writers, that you are the writer. The person interviewing you is perhaps not at your artistic understanding or ability, and so they write what they think they heard. And whatever intuition you were trying to share, they weren't ready for and don't get it. And they said it, they knew it was important. They said it the best way they could. That's just human fallibility. It's not intentional. And they didn't mean to mischaracterize you, even if they did. So you have to go with that and understand, all right, we'll take care of this just down the road. And here we go.
Great. Any last questions?
I'm going to look at something. I don't know if it comes up on your...
You can screen share with this program at the bottom. There's a little...
Okay, let me just see if I covered everything I thought you might need. Let's see. No, I didn't. I must have closed that document, so I'll just let it go. I think the idea of interviewing, what's wonderful about it is the ancient art of conversation. And you can't ever let go of that. No tricks, no artifice. You don't need to come up with fancy language or convoluted questions or anything else. You need to get on the right wavelength with somebody. And that, so Tristan Tzara, I forgot. Okay, I didn't. So Tristan Tzara said, thought occurs in the mouth. So that's the idea of conversation. When you are dating somebody and you want to put your hand down a shirt or whatever you want to do, you're going to say everything you can say, like, oh man, you got beautiful eyes, or man, I love, it doesn't matter what you say, but you're going to say something. You did not think that out ahead of time. And yet it is so of the moment that it may work, even though you have never said this before. And it is that of the moment that the best interviews come out of. This has never been said before. And whatever gets us to that point. And it's just often thinking, you said something, I thought about what you said, here's what I'm saying in reaction. No mystery, no magic to that. Just what I said at the start. It is good conversation, meaningful in its intent, but you can never let it rise to artifice. You can't try to make it meaningful. It must get there on its own. And if you're patient and if you're listening, I have to say, two thinking beings in the same room achieve meaning. It works. It's a successful model. You got to trust it.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Tito. That was really great. And I don't know if there are follow-up questions. Maybe I'll share your email address with them.
Okay, that would be fine.
This is really wonderful, and I think we're better prepared to go out into the world and have our conversations.
I have to say, whatever it is that keeps us from preparing, it's some version of fear. And preparation, also knowing you're never going to use that preparation on some odd level, but preparation takes that fear away. You're ready to meet somebody and talk with them if you have done the work you're supposed to do. So I just leave you with that.